Hello, Frizzle faction. I'm happy to tell you about today the last 10-ish books that I read. I'm going to be telling you about these books in the order in which I read them, except I'm saving my favorite for last. First up, I read Only Bad Options and Only Good Enemies, a sci-fi romance duology. There are more books in this world following different people, and I'll get around to those eventually, but just these two. One of the things that I really appreciated about these books is it made both of our protagonists, the hero and the heroine, so competent. The hero was an assassin, fighter, warrior guy, top of his game, super good at killing things. And then our heroine was a super competent engineer, super good at fixing things and coming up with little mechanical solutions to problems. And then when they combine their forces, unstoppable. And I love that kind of power couple dynamic, and it was so fun. But I feel like where this book really shined is it did the enemies to lovers with a fated mates bond and mutual pining so well. Where these characters start off complete enemies, literally trying to kill each other, when they discover that they're forming a psychic bond because they are fated mates. Which just makes them want to kill each other more in the beginning. And then over the course of the books, they have to start working together to take down a big bad that's threatening them both. And then they start bonding, they start maybe wanting each other's company, and that tension and angst of they want to kill each other, but they're starting to see the goodness in them. But what if that's just the psychic bond messing with their heads? And all of the questions of, is this really even my feelings? Can I trust this feeling of love that is blossoming? Between the fast-paced action and the exquisite mutual pining, I loved these books. I do think that the book 1 was a lot stronger than book 2, because book 1 had better romantic tension, and book 2 had a weaker sci-fi plot, but I did love them both. Gave them both 4 stars. I then read Calico Thunder Rides Again. If you are looking for dragons, magical circuses set in the 1920s with magical speakeasies and the mob and everything, this book delivers on all of that. It's very fun. We are following a circus master who is in debt to the mob, and he has to round out the money really quick. And he has to do a little bit of some shady business practices to get the money in time, which gets him in trouble with his circus performers. One of the things that I loved about this book is it just nailed its setting and tone. Anything that you could want from big top circus book, it's in here. I think one of the things that is holding this book back is that it doesn't quite have a firm target audience. The whimsical tone and the simplistic writing style made it feel more like a book aimed at children, but our main characters are adults, so I find myself a little bit struggling who to recommend this to, but I think I'd more land on the side of recommending this to a middle grade audience. As for those adults, one of the things that I really loved about this book is that our protagonist has a steady girlfriend, and they are very cute together. There's a lot of great scenes where they have really good communication about their relationship and the fate of the circus, and they're just an awesome power couple. I liked it. I was having fun all the way through this book, but I never really got invested in the actual fate of the circus or in our characters, so I was a little bored. I'm gonna give this book 3 stars. I then read Red Sister, and I have some conflicting thoughts on this one. I really like the premise and the setting of this. We are following a little girl who's kind of a cast-off orphan, and she gets taken in by this convent of warrior assassin nuns and is trained up to be an assassin. Throughout the entire book, there's this looming prophecy about a chosen one. For various reasons, a bunch of the nuns think that this prophecy is eminently about to be coming true, so there's kind of a question throughout the book of, is our protagonist the chosen one, or is it one of these other little girls who's also being trained to be an assassin along with her in assassin school class. Some people in this world are born with magical abilities, which can then be trained and honed even better. There's 4 different types of magic. There's the strong one, the fast one, the magic one, and the other magic one. And no, I couldn't tell you what the difference is between the 2 magic ones. The world building is also in this interesting niche of so far post-apocalyptic that it's circled from sci-fi into fantasy again, where they're on this world that is being slowly frozen, but then there's this giant lens in the sky that their ancestors put up there that melts this band in the ice around the planet, and then they all have to cram in and live there, and that creates interesting political situations. So all of those building blocks, I love them. I also love how incredibly female-focused this book is, which is especially impressive because it's from a male author, where a vast majority of our characters are women. And though I don't think this book was sexist, and I have no complaints there. I do think that it did miss the mark a little bit on actually feeling feminine, where there's like this special feeling of female friendships, of this mix of like codependency and cattiness that I feel like this book was missing a little bit. It felt a little bit more like all of these girls at the magical assassin school were just like guys making guy friends instead of girls making girlfriends, you know? But in the end, despite all of these really interesting and compelling elements, a lot of this book just felt like it was in the same holding pattern over and over, where it was the same training sequences. It was the same questions of, who is the chosen one? Does it even matter? It matters, does it? And just like the same conflicts and things happening over and over, and I got pretty bored with them by the end of the book. To the point where, even once we had reached the big climactic battle at the end, I was considering DNFing this book. So in the end, 2 stars for Red Sister. I see why people love this book, but didn't quite hit the mark for me. And this was the book that me and my patrons read as a book club. It was super fun. And if you want to join us, this is the book we're reading now, and this is the book we're reading next. You can sign up to be a patron here on YouTube memberships or the higher tiers on Ko-fi. I then jumped in to Winter Lost, and oh, how I have missed the Mercy Thompson world. One of the things that really helped me love this book even more than some of my previous iterations with this series is I lowered some expectations, which sounds kind of mean, but like, it was the secret to the success here, where like, this series is so long and it's been setting up so many awesome plot things, and then every time I've been picking up one of these books, I've been like, oh, is this the book where we're going to get this answer? And the answer is always no, it's not the book where we're going to get the answer. So I went into this book just thinking, I'm going to have a fun adventure with these characters. It's not going to progress the series plots barely at all, but it's going to be cool and fun, and I'm going to have a blast. And I did, so there we go. So this is book 14 in the Mercy Thompson series. This is a series following a coyote shapeshifter as she gets involved in the werewolf hacks in her area and all the other supernatural creatures around her, as she has to save herself, save her friends, save the city, and sometimes save the world. And where this series really excels is in its character work, where all of these characters I've come to love and so appreciate. One of the things that I actually really appreciated about this book is that for most of the book we're definitely following Mercy and her husband pretty closely as they go on a winter adventure. But every now and then we get a chapter like interlude flash to one of their other side characters doing something else for a chapter, and I really loved those chapters. Even though they interrupted the flow of the story, I was here to have fun with the characters. So there we go. One of the things that I so appreciated about this book is the relationship between Mercy and her husband. For like the first half of the series, it's Mercy in a love triangle, it's Mercy adjusting to the new romances and all of that. But then now here in the second half of the series, she's just like in a stable relationship that's loving and caring and beautiful. And like, I love their caring banter. I love their support of each other. It's just so fun to see. Getting a little personal, the last time I read a Mercy Thompson book, I wasn't yet married, and honestly, like, seeing this healthy marriage and seeing how cute they were hit different now that I'm in my own cute, healthy marriage, because I'm like, oh, we do that kind of thing too, except they're doing it fighting monsters and shape-shifting. I'm going to keep reading this series until the end of time because I love them. The characters all have a very special place in my heart. They're so bingeable, so easy to read, and so fun. I highly recommend the series as a whole. Don't let the book covers, especially for the first few books, scare you because they are not representative of the contents of the book. I gave Winter Lost 4 stars. I then read Into the Fire, another sci-fi romance book. I binged a lot of those this month. There's more coming up. In book 1 of this series, we had our hero and our heroine enter into a deadly competition, where it's a combination of a race and a fighting match, extreme sports edition in crazy Twister land. And along the way in that book, they become race partners and then romantic partners. And it was a very fun book. I jumped into the sequel here, and it's after all of the events of the race, they're dealing with the fallout. The bad guy from book 1 is still kicking around, causing some trouble in book 2, and that trouble is morphing and changing. And they must go visit a new extreme planet. This time it's all fiery, into the fire, in order to resolve some family drama from our heroine's past, which I did think was a really fun angle and well done. I definitely liked both books in this series, but I liked book 1 better than this one, Into the Fire, book 2, and I think a lot of the reason for that is book 1 had a strong romance, and with that, some character arcs and good relationship building. Here in book 2, we are dealing with some things directly personal to our characters, like the family drama. but it's a lot less focused on watching them grow and learn things about themselves and each other, and it's more just, we are now in a stable relationship, also there's some plot to happen. And without that like juicy internal conflict relationship drama from book 1, book 2 fizzled out a little bit for me, and I'm giving this book 3 stars. I did still like it though. And oh, can we just have a minute to admire this cover? I love it. I then read See You Yesterday, which is a time loop romance. I've been thinking for a while about like, what is the meaning of this title? What does it mean for seeing you yesterday? Because it's a time loop, but they don't like go back to yesterday at any point. And I think the title just doesn't make sense. It's just supposed to imply there's some weird time travel shenanigans going on, which there is in this book. I think one of the things that this book really nailed is it's a time loop romance, and both of our love interests are stuck in the time loop together. So they get to bond in this situation that's high stress, that's high monotony at the same time, that has no consequences for the outside world, and yet their relationship between each other does have consequences because they're both experiencing this time loop together. At the beginning of this book, I had a real struggle connecting with our main character. I think she's definitely intentionally written to be pretty unlikable here at the outset. At least that was my interpretation of the book. And then over the course of the book, she became a lot more likable, and I think there were kind of 2 different mechanisms for that. One is that I just got to know her better and I understood better where she was coming from when she was really rude to people. And so even if her rudeness hadn't actually changed, I understood it a lot better. And then the second mechanism is she got some character arcs where she became a lot more comfortable with herself, where she reconciled some past trauma, and that made it easier for her not to be rude to people, resulting in a much more likable heroine at the end of the book than the beginning, and that was a very satisfying arc to watch. Though at the beginning of the book I did almost DNF it because she was just so annoying. The guy she's stuck in a time loop with is a total physics nerd, and that also brings some interesting sci-fi elements into this book, where she is like, I think we're gonna get out of this time loop by doing good deeds, and he's like, maybe we actually need to study physics and find a solution there. And the technobabble around all that was okay. I've seen worse, I've seen better. We're about to get into worse in the next book. I shipped the romance, I felt like it worked. I was definitely in love with this book by the end of it, even though that wasn't my first impression. I gave See You Yesterday 4 stars. I then read Full Speed to a Crash Landing, which gets the award of, I think, the worst sci-fi technobabble I've ever seen. I will not be going into that further here, but if you want a larger rant about it, you can go to my Reading Sci-Fi Romance Until I Get a 5-Star recent video. So in this novella, we're following a woman, and she is a salvage collector across the galaxy. Her ship malfunctions and she crashes into this planet, and her emergency beacon is picked up by this shady-ish government salvage crew, and then she gets tangled up in what they are trying to do on this planet. I felt like this heroine was so annoying. She was like the very, very babbly, quippy kind of protagonist, but like not clever at any point. And it just grated on my nerves so bad, made worse by a terrible audiobook narrator performance. And I hated this protagonist with every fiber of my being, which of course made it very difficult to enjoy the romance or the plot of this book. It did have a few redeeming qualities, like it was fast-paced. The plot was kind of interesting, and I thought it had some interesting discussions and themes around alien archaeology discussions. So I'm giving Full Speed to a Crash Landing 2 stars. I then read Masquerades of Spring. This is a spin-off novel to the Rivers of London series. It takes place in 1920s New York. We're following some wizards who are trying to track down some cursed jazz instruments. We're really exploring like the culture of that time and the music, especially as it intersected with Black experiences of that time and with queer experiences of that time. So like the whole setting and the mood and the vibe of this book, great, I loved it. But then the actual plot, less good. The actual characters, less good. This book is narrated by a guy who's a new character, and he is just like tip-top tier annoying. He's very passive. He doesn't want to get involved in this investigation or the plot. There's a few times where like the plot is practically knocking on his door, sometimes literally knocking on his door, and he's like, yeah, I'd rather not. Can we not? And like, I hate those kind of protagonists so much. One of our side characters of this book is one of the main characters of the main series, Nightingale, and I was like so excited to see him in action, and then we got like barely any Nightingale content, and I was so crushed. Looking at reviews from other readers, I know that some people who are much less annoyed by the protagonist of this book enjoyed the story a lot more, and I can see how that could happen. But for me, this was a big miss, because it's just so hard for me to get on board with whiny, passive, stupid protagonists. So I gave Masquerades of Spring 2 stars. I then read Valor's Choice. This is a military sci-fi novel from the year 2000, and usually that's not exactly my thing. But this one gets the asterisk of written by a woman starring competent female protagonist, and then that does become my thing, because I love female-centered sci-fi. So our protagonist is this woman, and she is a seasoned space marine. There's this many decades-long running war between like the good guys Federation and the evil other aliens. And she's been fighting for the Federation. She's a little jaded at this point because just at the beginning of this book, she's coming off the heels of a battle that killed many members of her platoon. And then she has to take her platoon into a new situation. And this one is more of a diplomatic mission where her platoon is ostensibly just supposed to be an honor guard for a diplomatic mission, but then it quickly becomes more complicated than that. I thought this book balanced really well of like the grittiness of being in a war zone and being in a battle and the focus on camaraderie between members of this platoon, where we really take time to get to know the characters in the platoon, the relationships between them, and especially focusing in on our protagonist, how she feels to all of the characters. She has a little bit of tension with her kind of co-commander of this platoon. She's very experienced at war, he's very inexperienced, and they're kind of bouncing off each other throughout the book. And also they have some romantic tension, which hasn't gone anywhere yet, but I'm very excited for it to go somewhere. I thought the pacing in this book was exquisite. Like I said, it really well balances the slower military camaraderie moments and the faster military action moments, and I am so excited to continue reading this series. I gave Valor's Choice 4 stars. Now, I picked this book out of my patron TBR jar where my patrons can submit a book and I get to read it. And Striped Wolfie, thank you so much for submitting this book. Like, the TBR jar has never been a competition, right? Like, you don't need to submit a book that you think I'm gonna like, just a book that you want me to read, even if you think I'm gonna hate it. It's fine. But up until Valor's Choice, every single pick from this jar had been 3 stars. So this one is most definitely the winner. Okay, now it's time to pick out the very last slip of paper in this jar. So I know who this is from, but I don't know what it is. I'm excited to pick it out. We have Thinking Fast and Slow. This book will change the way that you think and change the way that you think about thinking. That's a really fun tagline. I like it. I'm excited to read this one. I've been having a lot of fun with this TBR jar and it broadening my book horizons in interesting ways, so I'm definitely going to plan on continuing doing it. As you can see, we are out of slips of paper, so I'm relying on you guys to submit some. You can submit a book by becoming a patron here on YouTube memberships or the higher tiers through Ko-fi. The TBR jar is always accepting submissions, and I think I'm going to pick out my next one when we have about 3 or more slips of paper in here. So there's enough to actually pick from. Then my favorite book of this whole batch is Penric and the Bandit. This is the 13th book of its series, and I love how this series continually changes up the stakes and what is happening in these books. Because at the beginning of the series, our protagonist Penric is just a scared teenage boy. Here at book 13, he is middle-aged, a powerful sorcerer, and a priest. And he's going on a little quest, and along the way, he picks up a bandit as a traveling companion. And this book is so rich in dramatic irony because we both get Penric's point of view and the bandit's point of view. Because the bandit's point of view is like, wow, this guy seems so naive and stupid, and like, I am so excited to steal everything from him. And then we get Penric's point of view, and he is 100% aware that he's traveling with a bandit who wants to steal everything from him and is 100% capable of protecting himself. And he feels like it's his priestly duty to maybe rehabilitate this bandit, so they have some interesting conflicting motives going on here. I was cackling and having so much fun with this book, and yes, its plot is a little simplistic, but like, it brought me so much joy and comfort, and I loved the craft present in this one. I gave Penric and the Bandit 4 stars. One of these days we're gonna get to the end and my favorite book of the wrap-up is gonna be 5 stars, but that's not today. Thank you for watching, and may I recommend watching my Reading Sci-fi Romance Until I Get a 5-Star video where I talk more about quite a few books in this wrap-up.